Hello and welcome to the Sideshed podcast. My name is Matt Jones and you are joining us today for the second episode of the three-part series that we have titled The Top 3 Mistakes Growing Trade Businesses Make. I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Danny Kerr from BT Academy, and this episode is called Mistake number 2, owners spending their time on the wrong things, which leads on from the first episode, which was called Mistake number 1, hiring the wrong people in your business. If you haven't heard the first one, make sure you go and check it out and enjoy this episode, certainly. Also, make sure you head across to the show notes because all of the frameworks, as you will hear in this podcast, are going to be available to you for the grand price of $0. So go and check them out because they are absolute game changers. I know I've got them and I'm using them. Anyway, that's all from me. Enjoy the podcast and we look forward to your feedback. The Sideshed podcast is made possible because of Tradie Web Guys, creators of beautiful websites designed specifically for tradies and contractors. If you're tired of dealing with web designers that have no idea about your industry, then head across to tradiewebguys.com.au and reach out. Like many companies from all over the place, you'll be very glad you did.
Giving tradies and contractors around the globe the tools to run a modern business. You're listening to Toolbox Talks from the Sideshed. Now here's your host, Matt Jones.
Hello and welcome back to Toolbox Talks on the Sideshed. You are joining us today for part 2 of the top 3 mistakes growing trade businesses make. I'm joined with my co-host, Danny Kerr from BT Academy in Canada. Danny, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Matt.
So Danny, this is part 2. First episode, we spoke about attracting the right talent. You dropped some absolute golden nuggets in there on, I suppose, some frameworks that guys can use when they're going through that recruiting process. For the listeners that missed that, be sure to go back and check it out. There's also some links going to be in the show notes there to some frameworks which Danny has generously offered up to you guys for the grand total of $0. So make sure you head across there and grab those because they are really, really, really helpful. Danny, in this episode, we're talking about gross profit margin and the lack of focus on. So this is going to be an interesting episode because I'm sure there's a lot of listeners out there that are probably borderline thinking, I'm just going to turn this one off because I don't really want to think about it. But don't turn it off. You need to think about it.
Totally. Yeah. It's massive. And I think for a lot of people, they just misunderstand the little amount of work it takes to change your entire year and probably double your profit.
And I'd just like to say, I suppose, at this point in the conversation, for the listeners out there, before, or if any of you think you're tuning out, don't, because Danny's got an amazing spreadsheet that he's put together, which he's also offered up for you guys, which can help you really get an amazing overview as to your finances, your leads, your costs, your overheads, like everything. It's this incredible spreadsheet. It's going to be available through the link in the show notes. So whatever you do, make sure you head across there and get that. And then when you get it, just book in a time to have a chat with Danny and he'll run you through how to set it up for your business. So thank you once again for that stuff, Danny. It's amazeballs.
You got it, man. Yeah, no worries.
All right, man. So let's talk about this because like a focus on growing profit margin. Yep, sure. We all like to pull the wool over our eyes sometimes, but it's not the smartest thing to do. Are we talking, I suppose we're typically talking here to the business owner. Would that be right?
Yep, exactly.
Is this something that you would typically share with your team, managers, etc.?
Certainly. I mean, this is a great motivator. When you understand the profit margins of a job and how profitable something is doing after materials and labor and subs and stuff, you can really start to gauge the heartbeat of the health of the company. And it allows you to also hold your people accountable on those jobs to hitting those margins. So maybe your project manager knows the profitability of the job, but also maybe just your staff knows the time each job has been given and if they're under budget or over budget and how they're impacting the margins as well. And everyone can share in the profitability of doing better than what was projected.
I think what's really helpful, Danny, as well, from a business owner's point of view, is if you can communicate clearly, I suppose, how much it actually does cost to run a business to staff. Because so often, especially in the trades, you'll get staff that go out to jobs and they might make, they might do one job and they might invoice for, $1,000, and then they think, well, how's this fair? I'm only getting paid $100 out of it, kind of thing. But if they only really understood what's involved and the costs that are involved in actually running that business, communicating that, I think, can make a big difference to the morale of the team.
Yeah, you have to do it right, and you have to understand your numbers clearly to be able to express it right. I mean, if you don't, I think it can blow up in your face. But I've always been one to share the margins with our company, to share the revenue of our company with our entire team, and really make everybody privy to what's going on. And some of them are more interested than others, and some of them, it's just good for them to hear that we're doing well. But ultimately, for me, more than even just the team, it's very important that I understand what our revenue targets are for the year, what our gross profit margins off of those revenue need to be in order for us to A, pay for the overhead of the company, which is always growing in a growing business, and B, still have enough left over for profit for myself and for the company for next year.
So in your experience, Danny, is it like a laziness thing? Is it a lack of education? Is it a fear, ignorance, lack of time? Like why do people tend to fall into this trap of not really getting clarity and keeping themselves accountable to gross profit and numbers in their business?
People do what they're good at, right? I mean, you probably start a business being really good at your craft, at your trade, kind of killing it, providing really good service, working maybe even with some awesome people on site. And you're not necessarily like attuned to sitting down at a long day with paint on your fingers and 14-hour day working in the field with your guys and saying, man, I'm going to sit in front of an Excel sheet now and see how we did. Like that might not be your natural habit of what to do. And in the beginning, with a lot of the people we work with, it can be a little bit of a new idea for them. And for some of them, it's not, but they just never knew how to track it properly. But I think just giving them a habitual routine, or at the end of the week, let's look at how the jobs performed. Let's look at how much profit was made off those jobs. Can actually be quite exciting because it's real money, And it allows you to change your behavior, change your action items for next week, change how you talk to some of your staff, change your focuses based on where you're seeing profit coming and where you're seeing profit lost.
I think one of the big things or the big changes that I've made in the last 12 months as well is regularly checking it. Ideally every week. Admittedly, sometimes it slips beyond that. However, and to be fair, you clarified this last time we spoke. I know you sort of teach a weekly recap, don't you, on financial figures and that kind of thing.
Yeah, at the end of the day, every 2 weeks, all of our members that work with us are held accountable to updating their profitability per job, how many sales they got, how many leads and estimates they got brought in, and how much dollars they produced and invoiced for, and how many labor hours were worked. So we do a bi-weekly update on that with them, and we can clearly then see how the business is performing.
Yeah.
But of all those numbers, our number one number we're looking at all times is their gross profit margin made off the job.
Okay. So I think that's a big thing. And I know in the past, I've let it go so long between looking at figures that it kind of, by the time you can set all these goals and things, but you haven't got like small bite-sized achievable goals to look towards and monitor. Like it's much easier to steer the ship in a different direction if you look at something after a week and say, oh shit, that's not working. Whereas if it's 3 months down the track, you're like, well, now we're 3 months down the track. I basically go reset the entire goal.
Totally. You might do a couple jobs and within a week or two realize, shit, we've been not charging upselling our materials enough. Or man, this labor rate that I've been charging since I gave my guys raises, I need to raise my labor rate. And when you start to see these things happen in real time, you can start to make real time changes. But if you wait 6 months or 3 months or a year in some cases, you have to wait a whole year to make change in your company. That you're not nimble enough to react to the environment, the ever-changing environment of a business.
Yeah, okay. So for the listeners out there, Danny, let's talk about the difference between profit and turnover, because like you hear so much people saying, oh, my business turned over, X, $2 million last year. And then you say, okay, well, that's great, but what money did you make out of it in the end,
Yeah, sure. So a couple things. One, when you're below $500,000 in business or in turnover, you are able to control all things. You are probably involved in the day-to-day. So while you're working, you are providing free labor for your company, and you're able to be profitable in quite a simple format. And you can kind of make money for yourself, put it in the bank, and no worries. When you start to get to $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, the overhead costs of your company, these are the costs that are not related to producing a job. Things like marketing expenses, things like overhead staff, like administrative assistants, phone bills, internet costs, vehicle costs, all that kind of stuff starts to skyrocket and starts to go up in such a way that if you're not careful and don't understand how much you're going to spend the next fiscal year, you can easily be just as profitable as you were last year on your jobs, but have nothing left for yourself. And people need to realize that a certain profit margin is absolutely needed in order to pay for the overhead of your company as you get bigger, because that scales up quite quickly, but also leaving some not only for yourself, but some for the company itself for its next fiscal year so it can reinvest in its own growth.
Yeah, okay. And I suppose in order to achieve that correctly, accurately, I should say, and keep on top of it, like monitoring it and things like that, who Do you encourage like an accountability sort of partner, or do you just encourage, like, I mean, how do you keep on top of this stuff, when we're all busy and everyone's doing, 15 jobs a day and, wearing every hat in the business?
Yeah, it's two things. I mean, one, you need a bit of a system. So something like QuickBooks or a CRM system that helps track this stuff.
Yep.
We're also going to give everyone on the call a really cool Excel file, which helps you do job costing and tracking and puts it against your budget. But yeah, like you said, accountability, like we hold all of our people accountable every 2 weeks. We need this update by Friday so that on Monday we can see how you're doing as a business. We have 120 companies we're working with, and they're all held accountable to this. So it becomes ritual for them. And in doing that, we're slowly changing the way people's behavior patterns are and the way they spend their time, because they're seeing where the problem areas really are. Beyond their emotional thoughts of where things are, they can see the facts, and that really changes their ability to react to stuff. Once that starts happening, buy-in kind of kicks in. Now we don't have to be so forceful for updates. They're literally like, they want to see the update.
Interesting. And so what would you, I mean, in your experience, introducing this, I'm sure at first you must get like a bit of apprehension with a lot of the guys, and they're, maybe a bit of ignorance in some regard. Is there like a turning point moment where they're like, wow, this is actually, I'm really buying into this?
It depends on their awareness. A lot of the guys we work with are approaching on $1 million a year in revenue. They're starting to get to a point where they've already seen some of the pain of not doing this. So they've just been trying to find a nice way to do it. They just haven't found, they'd be like, finally, like a nice, simple way to update this stuff and see it in a way that's conducive for my brain. And so we have a pretty good format for doing that. And I think it just helps them find relief and knowing there is an answer to the problem they've been wondering about for a long time.
Yeah, okay. But I suppose even on a subliminal level, like that would suck up a lot of energy, especially for a business owner that's running, a business in the millions. Like that's kind of a big stress that would be plaguing you constantly if you didn't have a process like that down pat, and you could sort of sit back and look at it and say, okay, cool. Well, this is sort of where we're at. This is where we're tracking. This is how we're looking for upcoming months, years, etc.
Yeah, totally. It's the habit itself is massive. And what it allows you to do is when you start to nail it down, it's not just on you to do all the updates. As your team grows and you get a project manager involved and maybe an administrative assistant, it's up to them as well to do their updates for their jobs that they're working on, or your admin assistant to do an overall company update, so that as a team, you guys can sit down on a Monday after everyone's done their updates on Friday and together see where you guys are coming to, where you guys are going. And yeah, it starts with just the owner doing it. It starts with their due diligence, but over time they can delegate that down to their team to help with the updates. So
are there any specific areas in a business that when you look at a company, or when you've been looking at, companies over the years, is there like a specific area that tends to be more affected than others when it comes to a lack of clarity, or maybe funds being missed, or spending too much in certain areas?
I actually think people spend too little on marketing. It always astounds me how little they spend on marketing. You're talking about a boom time in Australia right now. Yeah, we've had house prices go up 30% year over year, 2 years in a row now. The amount of buyers' confidence that's given to a bunch of our homeowners is abnormal. It's ballooned. And our guys have become lazy at marketing.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen is when this market turns, the ones who were consistently marketing, consistently building a brand presence, they're going to be the ones that are around still. I've been through the recession in 2008. I've seen what happens when you have to go out and hunt for leads. And I think it's really healthy for people to spend more money on marketing. And what I would say is it's actually important for people to actually charge more for their services. A lot of times they're still charging similar rates they were charging when they were a small business. And as they're growing, they don't realize they can charge significantly more. And that charge rate allows you to be a sustainable growing company. And that's okay. You don't have to worry that much. So many people are so worried about increasing their pricing. It's such a personal thing that new customer they're starting to work with, they don't know anything about the old price. And you're a growing company. Feel free to increase your price, to increase your margins, to enable you to increase spending in the right areas of the company. Do I see people spend a lot in other areas? I mean, yes and no. I find a lot of the guys, if anything, they're just too stringent on overhead, and they don't realize that it's the right allocation of that capital that's going to allow them to grow in the first place.
I think as well, there must certainly be a formula. I mean, I know we recorded one of our listeners actually sent in with this question, and we had it answered by another gentleman on the show. But he basically wanted to know, when the right time to employ a new staff member is. Is it when you're in the planning stage, or is it when you have the work there? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so so funny story. So when I first started this whole business with the painting side of it, anyways, I was booking all my work before I hired anybody. So I, from January till May during our off season, was getting work. I was securing paint jobs for the summer. I was collecting 10% deposits. I was using those 10% deposits to buy my equipment and get the business ready. And I pre-booked my entire month of May up. And when I did that, I booked it up for 6 people. And then in late March, early April, I started hiring my painters and got them ready for a launch in May 1st. So yeah, I usually try and prove it first, go get the sales for it, and then hire people. That said, I mean, in today's economy, it's often harder to find people than it is to get the work. So if you're, out there day to day and you're trying to find like a new, say, technician, painter, landscaper, guy out in the field, I would build a business around finding a good person in a sense of flipping that around now. Now, if you're going to add an overhead position, so like a project manager or an administrator or something like that, what I want to get very clear on is what is their ROI to the company. So if I've got a project manager that's going to cost me $80,000 next year, or let's just say for a round number, I don't know if you pay these guys this much, but say $100,000 next year, I need to make sure that guy makes me over $100,000 in gross profit, right? So if you have a 50% margin on your jobs, that guy needs to make you at least $200,000 more in revenue than your original plan just to pay for a salary, let alone provide revenue back to the company. So I might say, hey, we were going to do $1 million. Now that we're hiring you on, we need to hit 1.5 million. That's going to enable you to pay for yourself, pay for the company getting some profit off of you, and also give me a little chunk of change as well. Otherwise, that role isn't worth hiring for.
That conversation is based off figures that you would derive around the cost of having that guy work for you. Is that right? So you would sit there and say, okay, well, it's going to cost me this much. This is the formula, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. If I have this new project manager on, I should be able to bring on 2 or 3 more guys, which should be able to bring on this much more revenue for the year, which should equal out everything. And so you can pre-calculate what the expectations are of somebody, and then backdate those goals to see whether or not that's even possible.
So there's people listening to this right now that will be going, okay, well, that's exactly where I'm at. I need to put somebody on in an administration role because I'm currently answering all my phones. I'm currently doing all my invoicing. I'm doing all this stuff myself. So how do you then ascertain, I suppose, like what are the, for an administration role in an organization, what would the KPIs be? So how could somebody in an administrative role actually increase turnover per se?
Because you're going to relinquish your time, which is going to enable you to go and that's the owner, to go get more results, right? So now this administrator at $40,000 a year doubles your ability to go spend, another 30 hours a week doing sales or whatever that is. And then you can say, okay, well, that means I can do 5 more quotes a week, or I can do that much more a week, which will equal out $300,000 more in revenue if I hit my goals, if I stay consistent to doing that. And then you're like, great, I spend $40K, I get $30K more or $300K more in revenue, and say at a 50% margin, again, just for example's sake, that makes us $150K. So sweet, that there's definitely an ROI in that position. My assistant, when I first brought her on, doubled my effectiveness. She took on all the stuff that I'm not great at and allowed me to do all the stuff that I am great at. She's my polar opposite. Same core values, polar opposite in strengths. And in doing that, we were able to double the business year over year.
That's brilliant. Yeah, because I think that's something that a lot of people will struggle with. Well, how can I afford to put this person on when they're, it's effectively they're not making money? But when you put it like that, they will 100% be making you money because it enables you or the team, for example, get out there and do what you're good at. I know, like for a lot of I suppose roles which are sales related, the KPIs are a little bit more direct, aren't they? Like you can put someone on in a sales capacity and say, well, you need to be selling this much. Whereas for an admin role, it's a little bit more, well, you need to be doing this so that the rest of the team can start doing this much.
If we're in an admin role too, and keep in mind like that's like the most apparent ROI is just freeing up your time as an owner. But for an admin role too, like we will still potentially have an administrator, maybe who's in charge of AR. And maybe, we have to get paid within 60 and 90 days of a construction job happening. Their job is to keep AR, say, below 2% net 60 days. And their job is to make sure those phone calls happen, make sure invoicing happens on time, make sure all those things happen in order to keep AR and cash flow in check. So they can certainly have KPIs that are directly relational to the business's ability to do better, but just a very blunt statement of like, look, man, like how many things do you do every week that are $15, $20, $25 an hour jobs that you really need to value your time better at this point in the game. When you're hitting $500,000 to $1 million a year, it's time to reevaluate how much your time is actually worth.
Okay, well, let's talk just quickly, getting towards the end of this episode now. Some tools that people can use, I suppose, to help them get keep better track of their profit margin. Obviously, the spreadsheet that you've got available for these guys, that's going to be paramount. You did mention some accounting / bookkeeping software. I know in Australia we use Xero accounting quite quite a lot. You guys are, QuickBooks or something over there?
Yeah, we used to use Xero actually originally. We switched over to QuickBooks, but they're both very, very good accounting softwares, both of them actually.
What about things like project management tools, job management tools, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I could throw some shout outs, right? I mean, if you're running a landscape install company, you want to use what I recommend would be Landscape Management Network, LMN. If you're doing landscape maintenance, you want to probably be using Service Autopilot. If you're running a painting company under 500K, you want to be using Cork CRM. If you're over 500K, you might want to look at M Help Desk or Job Nimbus. And that's actually, if you're running a roofing business in general, you definitely want to be running Job Nimbus. If you're doing a service business, so like junk removal, moving, window cleaning, things like that are kind of half-day services, and you're in and out really quick and you're routing a lot of people, you want to probably use something called Vonago, which is local here in Vancouver. There's a lot of systems out there that are project management softwares that are really good, and a lot of them link up with QuickBooks. Some of them link up with Xero, and it allows you to have your invoicing out quicker, allows you to have all your costs accumulated really quickly, and it also allows you to really route trucks, route people, track hours, all in one harmonious system where customers are tracked and their profiles are all added to with all this data.
And I suppose the paradigm there, I mean, obviously we work a lot with apps and programs and solutions and stuff as well for our clients, but a lot of the guys say, well, this is quite an expensive program. I don't really want to be spending that each month. But the argument always comes back to, I suppose, what's your time worth? I mean, like you were saying before, Danny, if that can enable you to be doing, 1 or 2 extra quotes a week, the time you're saving to, typing up your invoices in a Word doc or something ridiculous like that, how much more extra money is that saving you in the grand scheme of things? I mean, it could be worth paying $1,000 a month. Who knows?
Totally. And it depends where you're at, right? So like I was saying many, many times before, if you're below $500,000, some of this stuff is you're not quite ready for. Don't try and build the cart before you actually know how to ride the horse kind of thing, right? Like don't build everything too quickly because you're gonna get stuck. If you're hitting $500,000 to $1 million right now, you really need to understand like what got you here in business is no longer going to get you there. Never longer going to get to that next level just by piss and vinegar and hard work and putting your head down because you just don't have any more time to give. And it's time to find good people and good systems and trying to increase your rates and make sure you're profitable on jobs to afford those things. And it's time to start to think differently. And to move forward in the business, you need to be an orchestrator of this thing, not a doer of all these things anymore.
All right, love it. Well, look, I think we can pretty much wrap that one up right here. Is there anything that you think we've missed?
No, we've talked about a lot of general ideas and a lot of things that I think people could get some inspiration or nuggets from. Like you said, we've given you guys a bunch of these templates to use. There's a really incredible template that took us a lot of time to build out with an instructional video that goes along with it that'll help you build a budget for next year, help you build that back so you can do job tracking, so job costs per job. You can build a sales plan and a production plan for the whole year, and it basically tells you every week how much you need to hit for your goals, and you have a dashboard that basically gives you your goals versus your actuals sitting there for you to review at all times. This is our coaching tool that we use, so it allows us to hold our members accountable every 2 weeks to see where their numbers are at and actually help make sure they have the right advice to move forward. And if you're interested in to chat with us about that stuff, I think there's a link in there to book a time with either me or one of my team, and we can talk you through a little bit more about it and talk to you about BTA and what we do basically to help you guys through this stuff. So
brilliant. Look, I don't think we need to elaborate any further on that. Let's close this one off, and then we're going to come back for part 3, the third and final episode of the top 3 mistakes growing trade businesses make. Third episode is going to be called Incorrect Prioritization of Time. So, Danny, thank you once again for your time. Thank you once again for your knowledge. And we will come back in the following episode and wrap it all up. What do you say?
Sounds good, man.
Rock and roll. Ciao. Thank you for listening to another episode of Toolbox Talks. If you're liking what you hear, then you can head across to the siteshed.com where you can join our community by signing up to our Toolbox Talks. You'll get sent a weekly notification, which is basically a highlight of everything that we've spoken about during that week, along with any other industry news that may be relevant or specific to the trades. If you're enjoying the show, you can head across to iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, where you can leave us a review. That would be fantastic, and all the reviews get read out in the show. Likewise, if you have any friends or colleagues that you think would benefit from this show and the episodes that we create, then please go ahead and share it with them.